A ceasefire after 5 years of war. The Saudi-UAE coalition in Yemen begins a 2-week truce. But Houthi rebels say they'll continue their fight. How will this affect a conflict that has already created the world's greatest humanitarian crisis? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. Yemen is one of the few places left on earth without a coronavirus case. But health workers worry it's only a matter of time before they record the first infections. An outbreak would add more misery to a country suffering from 5 years of war. Fighting has destroyed hospitals, killed more than 100,000 people and pushed millions towards famine. The Saudi-UAE coalition has now begun a ceasefire after an appeal from the United Nations. It says the aim is to prevent a coronavirus outbreak, while giving the Iranian-backed Houthis a chance to join talks to end the conflict. The UN hopes the truce will be extended, but a Houthi spokesman told Al Jazeera the ceasefire is meaningless.
We will not abide by the ceasefire as long as Saudi Arabia continues to strike and impose a siege on Yemen, because what Saudi Arabia has announced is a continuation of the war and not a ceasefire, even if temporarily. As long as the siege is not lifted, we have the right to use our missiles, our drones and our marine weapons to target their airports, ports and ships. Saudi Arabia has to stop playing with words and stop the war completely and lift the siege. If not, the war will continue.
Let's introduce the panel. In London, Sultana Begum, Advocacy Manager for the Norwegian Refugee Council. In Sana'a, Hussain al-Bukhaiti, a Houthi and Yemeni affairs specialist. And also in London, Elisabeth Kendall, a Senior Research Fellow at Pembroke College at the University of Oxford. Welcome to you all. Hussain, first of all, Martin Griffiths, the UN Special Envoy, he says he's grateful for Saudi Arabia and the coalition for recognising this critical moment for Yemen, and he says the parties must now cease immediately all hostilities. Are the Houthis going to go along with this ceasefire?
I don't think they will accept this 2-week ceasefire, because as soon as the Saudi-led coalition has announced this 2 weeks ceasefire, here in Sana'a, the Yemeni government or the Houthis has announced what they call their national vision for a total ceasefire and as well a total lift of Saudi blockade in Yemen, and they have handed that vision to Mr. Griffith. That's why I think that was a clear message to the Saudi that they will not accept this 2-week ceasefire, because we believe here in Sana'a that the Saudi for asking for 2-week ceasefire, I mean they maybe want just to help themselves because of the coronavirus spread in Saudi Arabia, and they want to have the time to fight corona. That's why they ask for this 2 weeks. But at the end, what mostly Yemeni are suffering from is from the Saudi blockade. Despite the fact we still have not got any corona cases, but if corona arrives in Yemen, it will be a disaster. That's why.
Hussain, but just a moment, if I may interrupt, Hussain. Hussain, you can't go on forever fighting. At least this ceasefire gives an opportunity to start somewhere. Surely the Houthis would just take this first chance.
To be honest with you, what kind of chance you're speaking about is 2 weeks ceasefire. It means that the Saudi maybe they are not gonna bomb Yemen, but what Yemeni mostly suffer from is from the blockade. And if the Saudi really wanted a ceasefire, they should have announced a total ceasefire, and they should and must lift the blockade in Yemen. And that is exactly what Mohammed al-Houthi have said yesterday, that without a total ceasefire and as well without a total lift of the Saudi blockade, anything that the Saudi going to offer will not be accepted at all.
OK, Elisabeth, is the coronavirus why the Saudis proposed this ceasefire. Their own leadership is, we believe, holed up on private islands in the Red Sea because they're so fearful of contracting it. Is that what pushed the Saudis to offer this ceasefire?
Well, Bernard, of course, one could look at it like that. One could look at this very cynically, or one could take it for what it is, which is the offer of a ceasefire, which has to be very welcome. I'm disappointed to hear Mohammed's reaction to it. But yes, I think the virus has been instrumental in focusing Saudi attention on a ceasefire now. Yemen could absolutely be devastated if the coronavirus took off there. And one of the reasons we haven't seen it take off there is presumably because at the moment people are dying of so many other things. And of course, there's no testing. When it does arrive with a decimated health sector, it will rip through the country. So one has to take this as a very, very positive step. On the other hand, one could say that it's a cynical ploy by Saudi Arabia to take the opportunity of coronavirus to use it as an excuse to pull back after 6 years of war, a war that has been very expensive, not only monetarily, but reputationally, with much of the humanitarian crisis being blamed on Saudi Arabia. But also, of course, in practical terms, Saudi Arabia, as you say, is fighting the coronavirus inside Saudi. What's the point in controlling it in your own country if you share a 1,800-kilometre border to a country that's just about to get it, and quite a porous border? So everything points towards Saudi Arabia meaning this seriously, meaning this as a serious ceasefire. And we have to hope that the Houthis can reciprocate.
Sultana, an indication there from Elisabeth, but explain to me what you believe the consequences of a coronavirus outbreak would be in Yemen.
Firstly, I'd just like to reiterate Elisabeth's point in that we really welcome this ceasefire, and we're urging all parties, all of the warring parties, to lay down their weapons and really focus on what the real fight is right now, which is fighting a global pandemic, which will absolutely devastate Yemen. And when I talk about devastation, Elisabeth already mentioned that the health facilities, the war has destroyed Yemen's health facilities, its water systems. Many of its health workers haven't been paid for 2 years or more. We've got millions of displaced people who my organization is working with. Many of them are living in desert-like conditions, in overcrowded camps. They don't have access to water. They don't have access to health facilities. There's no way for people like that to self-isolate. So really what we need is, and the conflict makes it even more difficult because recently the fighting in Marib and Al-Jauf has resulted in 40,000 newly displaced people. And these people are already coming into an environment where you have 750,000 people who are already in need. So on the one hand, as an aid agency, we have trouble getting to people because of the fighting, because people are trapped by the conflict, or where our workers will fear for their own safety. But on the other hand, we're already dealing with a huge number of people with immense needs. And what the fighting is doing is creating even more need.
Hussain, aren't the Houthis just looking for an excuse not to go along with this ceasefire? Don't the Houthis really want to push the advantages, the military advantages they believe they're achieving in Marib, despite what the humanitarian consequences are there?
If you look to this announcement by Saudi Arabia, I believe it's just a trap. I mean, to announce a ceasefire of 14 days, what will this 14 days help Yemeni civilians? As long as the blockade is on Yemen, I don't think that anything will come good for this ceasefire. This means that after 2 weeks, Saudi could start, or start its campaign war against Yemen, start airstrike, and they totally ignore the situation in Yemen, the blockade that have killed hundreds of thousands of Yemenis, that have, I mean, as UNICEF have said one day, that one child die every 10 minutes because of preventable diseases like cholera, malaria, starvation, and we have not heard of this type of illness spreading in Yemen like that. That's why, I mean, I believe this is just a trap by Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure that the Saudi wanted to start the war again. And I can say that this truce announcement by Saudi is another declaration of war. This means that 2 weeks stop attacking us, and then they could launch more strikes on Yemen. And just want to mention, it's really strange that I've seen that many people are welcoming this ceasefire, Mr. Griffith and the UN Security Council and the British ambassador. But when the Houthi has announced a unilateral ceasefire 3 months ago, Saudi has rejected that. No one has welcomed that, and still that announcement and that unilateral ceasefire is still on the table. That's why I believe that if the Saudi will not accept a total ceasefire all over Yemen to stop their attack on the ground, on the sea, their air campaign, and to lift the blockade, Houthi here in Sana'a and Yemeni government in Sana'a will not accept any announcement by the Saudi if they are not going to lift their blockade and if they are not going to make a total ceasefire without, making it for 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Elisabeth, could the Saudis be in such a weakened position that demands by the Houthis to end the blockade of Yemen as well as the ceasefire could be seriously entertained by them? They are on the back foot here. Oil is much cheaper than they need it to be. The war is costing them a fortune.
I think Saudi Arabia put the blockade in place because it was concerned that the Houthis were receiving weapons to restart their war effort. And so you can understand why the blockade was in place in the first place. Of course, it perhaps was too stringent and ended up blocking food and medicine and vital supplies too. But here I think it's important to mention that actually, yes, there's plenty to criticise in this ceasefire. It is only for 2 weeks, but there is provision in the statement that was put out by the coalition for it to be extended. And it was very clear that the ultimate aim is for a lasting ceasefire and ultimately to make the space through that ceasefire, which can be extended, to allow the UN to broker meetings, to start a political process again. So really, the ball is in the Houthis' court. Will it accept it? Will it not? It is a comprehensive ceasefire. It is going to be for 2 weeks. It will be extendable beyond that. And yes, and it doesn't include the blockade. The blockade is separate from the ceasefire.
Hussain,
that's correct.
Hussain,
it isn't. Is a ceasefire.
Yes, Hussain, it is an extendable ceasefire.
The Yemeni civilians is the blockade.
Yes, but surely you must take the opportunity to take the ceasefire and build on it from there. You have to give some concession. No?
No, I mean, to be honest with you, Houthis here in Sana'a have given many confessions to Saudi Arabia. They have announced that unilateral ceasefire 3 months ago after they have hit Saudi main oil field in Bukhaiti. They have knocked down 50% of Saudi Arabia oil export, and after that they have announced a ceasefire. They were in a strong position, but still they have given concession. They have given Saudi a chance to accept the ceasefire, but which the Saudi have not done. And just want to add one thing, that when the guests have said about the blockade on Yemen is to stop the weapons coming to the Houthis. I mean, let's say that what the Saudi said about Iran supplying weapons to the Houthis is right. I mean, has this 5 years of blockade in Yemen, which have killed hundreds of thousands of Yemeni civilians, has it stopped any the flow of weapons from Iran to Houthi, if what they say was right? No, the Houthi every day, every time, every year, they are like deploying more weapons. They are extending their attack against Saudi Arabia. This means they are not getting any weapons from Iran because Saudi blockade has blocked food and medicine and everything from Yemen, and all ships coming to Yemen is searched by United Nations and by Saudi Arabia. That's why this blockade is a total failure, and any ceasefire will not accept to lift the blockade. This ceasefire will not be accepted from Sana'a.
Sultana, in terms of the blockade of the ports in Yemen, how serious is that in affecting aid coming into Yemen?
I think for a while what we saw was a very stringent blockade, which meant that food, fuel, medicines coming into the country at some point was completely blocked. Now, we've moved away from that. But having said that, we're still seeing problems at the ports. We're seeing ships coming, carrying food and other essentials, going through all these inspection processes, and there are a lot of delays. All these, the conflict also creates a disincentive for shipping companies to take the risk to come to Yemen. And at various times we've seen huge problems. So last year in August, what we saw was a dispute over fuel, which meant that because the parties were fighting over the fuel supplies coming into the country, as a humanitarian organization, what we started to see was entire countries that were, entire cities that were cut off from water supplies, hospitals that couldn't fuel their generators and things like that. So it's an ongoing issue, and even though there is more food and goods coming into the country, the delays and getting the food transported to different parts of the country because of challenges with that pushes the prices up. So one of the big issues at the moment for Yemenis is how is affording food, even if there is food in the markets, how they can afford it. So one of the concerns that we have at the moment is with this threat of COVID-19 and these measures that are going to be put in terms of preventing the outbreak of the virus, is that food and medicines and fuel continue to come into the country. At the moment, both sides in the conflict are saying that they will enable that, but we are concerned that if there is a further lockdown, that it could affect. Yemen relies on imports to feed itself, and so that will be a very concerning situation for us. And then I just want to go back to talking about the ceasefire. Look, my organization isn't a political actor. We don't take sides in this conflict. And what I can say to you is, in September, where there was a de-escalation in the country, we started to see significant benefits for the civilian population. People have suffered for more than 5 years in this conflict. Many people have died, the water systems, the hospitals, the civilian infrastructure has been destroyed in the country. And with the de-escalation, what we started to see is a reduction in the number of people that were being killed and injured. We started to see fewer attacks on hospitals and the things that people rely on to survive. So for us, it is essential when the whole world, countries like mine, I'm based in the UK now, I can see how this virus is devastating my country. Even our Prime Minister is now in intensive care. Yemen will not be able to deal with an outbreak. The health system is not set up, and the population is extremely, extremely vulnerable. Millions of hungry people, sick people. So we're really urging the warring parties to say enough is enough. We really need them to end this war now.
Sultana, Hussain, you heard Sultana there explain how the benefits of a de-escalation in violence. Most Yemenis now live in territory controlled by the Houthis. This coronavirus is not a joke. Surely there are benefits to the people living under your control to a ceasefire.
Of course, the spread of coronavirus is not a joke, as you mentioned, but we have to look, what will this ceasefire help Yemenis? Will Yemenis get any benefit from this ceasefire? No, absolutely not. 14 days while the blockade is still on Yemen. That's why this 14-day ceasefire is like, what you call it, a quarantine for corona. I mean, the Saudi want to quarantine itself, that Yemeni will not attack it, will not hurt it. That's why this ceasefire, as the Saudi announced it, is only helping Saudi Arabia. Is not helping Yemen, is helping Saudi to fight corona. And after 14 days, Saudi could extend its war campaign while the blockade is still in Yemen. That's why, I don't think that the Ansarullah, the Houthi, will accept it. And if they do in the coming hours or days, I think it will be one of the biggest mistakes they have done.
Elisabeth, clearly it looks like it's going to be difficult to persuade the Houthis to go along with this ceasefire. Would any pressure likely to be brought on them from their foreign sponsors, from the Iranians? Iran struggling enormously to deal with coronavirus. Would Iran have any bearing on this?
I think the Houthis themselves need to come to this decision. Yes, they have international sponsors. Yes, one of them is, to some extent, Iran, and Iran is suffering terribly. But ultimately, the Houthis need to be the ones to decide what the Houthis want. And I fail to understand how Mohammed can say that it makes no difference whether Saudi bombs drop on Yemen or not. clearly it does make a difference to those who are living under those bombs. It can only be helpful. So just leaving to one side whether Saudi's motivation is self-promotional or self-protective, or whether it's genuinely out of concern for the Yemeni people, that is neither here nor there. This is an opportunity for a ceasefire for 2 weeks, which can then be extended. Why would you not take it?
Hussain, Elisabeth has a point. There's an opportunity here to save lives, essentially, at the very minimum. Why not take that opportunity, despite your suspicions of the motives behind that offer of a ceasefire, to see what happens? It at least gives respite to Yemenis suffering from the fighting.
If the Saudi really cares about Yemeni, they should just lift the blockade and allow food and medicine to come into Yemen. And we remember that the Saudi have announced many ceasefire. One of the ceasefire they have announced is when they have invaded Aden, and the other one before they have entered Mocha and Hodeidah, and as well before they controlled Al Jawf. All that has been done by a ceasefire. But now, to be honest with you, it's not about what the Houthi want. The Houthi are in control of 70% of Yemeni population. That's why if they are not accepting this ceasefire, this means they are looking at what Yemeni people need. Because if they accept this ceasefire, this means that the Saudi will be clear, and all the international media will be talking about how good the Saudi, they have offered this ceasefire and how it has helped Yemeni. But in fact, is not helping Yemeni at all. The Saudi could actually, if they after announcing this 2-week ceasefire, why they didn't announce that they will at least lift the blockade, like in some way, like partitionally lifting this blockade. The Saudi knows that their airstrike campaign on Yemen is not actually hurting the Houthis, and with this 2-week ceasefire, they are expecting that Yemeni army and ballistic missile are planning to attacks against Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
That's why they just want
Thanks,
to
Hussain.
save themselves for 2 weeks.
Thanks, Hussain. Elisabeth, do you get the feeling that a golden opportunity is slipping away here? How do you manage such? I mean, the Houthis may be being intransigent. The Saudis have also been in the past. How on earth are you ever going to bring these parties together?
Well, it's easy to become despondent, Bernard. Yes, of course. And you have to admire the UN, and particularly the envoy, Martin Griffiths, for plugging on and on and on despite all the setbacks. But, you know, Mohammed really has made the argument for himself, which is that the Saudis have now offered the ceasefire, right? He's saying that if the Houthis take the opportunity, then the Saudis will have won somehow. But no, he's wrong. If the Houthis don't take this opportunity, then the Saudis will have totally won the moral high ground. The Houthis must play along with this. There needs to be this 2-week extendable gap in order for people to come round a table. Now, look, I know it's not going to be easy, and there are plenty of other problems lurking down the road, not least of which is the North-South divide. Talks before, even when they did happen, failed. We had Kuwait in 2016, we had Geneva in 2018, which was stillborn, the Houthis didn't even show up. We had Stockholm in 2018, which hasn't been implemented yet. We had Riyadh in 2019, which was with the South, and we had other talks informally in Muscat. None of them have worked.
All right, Elisabeth, thank you.
None of them have worked. So this is the time now, Mohammed. This is the time. This is the time to just take a step back and see if you can get somewhere.
And very quickly then, from you, Sultana, a reminder of the consequences of the fighting. Has Yemen made any preparations in case of a coronavirus outbreak? I'm reading 75 ventilators, 500 testing kits. Doesn't seem an awful lot.
Again, just to reiterate, being in the UK right now, we're seeing some of the richest, most nations with their most advanced health systems in the world unable to cope with this pandemic. So for Yemen, with a health system that has been so shattered by the conflict, and what's really, really important to know is that many people in the UK are, you know, the people that it's affecting the most in the UK, in the country where I am in right now, are those with pre-existing health conditions. In Yemen, you have millions of people who are hungry. You have young children who are malnourished. You have people with life-threatening health conditions, who aren't even able to get out of the country previously to get healthcare. In this kind of environment, this pandemic will be deadly. And I think that we can all agree on that. So my appeal to the warring parties, to all sides in this conflict, is that please put down your weapons and really think about the civilian population in Yemen. They've really suffered. They're already suffering from a massive humanitarian crisis.
Okay.
And COVID-19 could make their lives even worse.
All right. Thank you very much. We are unfortunately out of time, but thank you to all our guests, Sultana Begum, Hussain al-Bukhaiti and Elisabeth Kendall. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.